Hi, everybody. This is Kathy L. Murphy, the Pulpa Queen, and I'm still at my daughter's in North Dallas. So I'm reporting from her guest bedroom as I'm visiting my family here and my grandson. And I have my co-host, Robert Waltney, who's here tonight. And we are discussing Hush, Hush, Sweet Charlotte, which stars Bette Davis, Olivia de Havilland, and Joseph Cotten. Now, this was a film that I saw for the first time. I think it was third grade. And I know that is totally not appropriate for a third grader to see this film, but I can remember my mother taking us. We always went to see what my parents wanted to watch. And we went to see this at the Princess Theater in downtown Eureka, Kansas. And my Aunt Mabel was the ticket taker. And I can remember all three of my sisters and I were there, and I have never been so scared in my life. Your first time to see this was when, Robert?
Oh my gosh, probably early teens on cable. Probably like the Turner Network,
yep.
Turner Broadcasting.
Well, it was, I haven't watched it like today or this weekend because I've been up here, but I will be watching it again. But I watched it when I first moved to Holly Lake Ranch. I was going through all my old movie collection, and then I donated them all to my sister because now I'm using Netflix and all that. But I watched it, and I can remember when there's a certain part when a head rolls down the step where I was literally frozen in the theater seat. Those velvet theater seats that they used to have. And I couldn't move. I was so scared. And I'm watching it. I'm going, it did look pretty realistic, I have to admit, but it didn't have quite the same scare factor as it did when I was a child. But the story itself was still as intriguing. And of course, everybody played their role perfectly. Joseph Cotten always plays in these kind of, iconic films. And I don't really know much about that actor. Olivia de Havilland, of course, I know everything about her because of her playing Melanie in Gone with the Wind, and Bette Davis is my favorite. But what stood out for you the most in the story that made you, we talked about how this was one of our favorite horror films because it is in that genre.
Yeah, well, it's a wonderful psychological thriller, and of course, everything about it is gothic. So I think that the gothic tone of the story is really what draws me into it. It's just wonderfully woven. I love the opening flashback when Bette Davis's character Charlotte is a young girl and they're at a ball. I love
Alien or something. Yeah. It's pretty amazing how they did that. She was a little bit old now that I'm watching it now to be playing this, both roles. I mean, the flashback and then even the role of, well, maybe not the role of when it was happening, but.
Well, I think, what's interesting, if you watch how they did that, there are elements where they have her, the younger Charlotte, in shadow. They use Bette Davis's voice, but there is a younger actress that you can see in slight lighting. So she's, which is interesting because I was so fascinated with how they were able to pull that off and they almost needed to use, I think, probably a younger actress's voice because Bette Davis's voice is distinctively older. It's a smoker's voice, very distinctive.
Well, now if they did a remake of that, I mean, it's amazing how young you can make people
CGI
looking with that in films. In fact, when I watched the Shah Rukh Khan movie Fan, it wasn't until the third time I watched it, it was about this young fan who becomes obsessed with him, that I go, where do they find that guy that looks just like him? I found out that it was all done with, all these new computer digital effects. They made him slider of build, and they actually there on YouTube is a whole video on how they made him look younger by putting these, you know, rubber prosthetics and to puff out his cheeks. And I couldn't even believe it was him. Of course, they changed him up enough, but then when I realized that it was him, I was just absolutely blown away by the acting, because he plays this really young kid, and then he plays, you know, a star, very much the way Shah Rukh Khan is. So if they remade that film today, they could probably, you know, make the character who's older look younger.
Or, well, yeah, or a slightly younger character who they age.
Right.
Yeah.
They can do that. Remember Back to the Future when they did that with the mom and dad? That was that. I was just, all the characters got older and they made the young characters look older. And it's a lot easier to lower your voice when you're an actor to play an older person than it is to tap to a lovely little lilting voice of a Southern belle.
I know, but that's one of the things I thought that stood out, though, is when they did the flashback and they used Bette Davis's voice, and it's slightly disturbing, but it's sort of in keeping with the picture, I guess. You know, it is grotesque in its gothic nature. You know,
well, we learned this morning in our Writers Club from author Carolyn Haynes that, you know, good fiction has 4 elements. It has the characters, it has the setting, it has the theme, and the plot. Mm-hmm. And a good Southern Gothic is when the character development and the setting works in such a way that you become so involved. And of course, it's always got that twisted spin on things. But yes, it is. Southern Gothic is probably one of my favorite genres because you never know what to expect. You know, family dysfunction is like trying to describe chaos. And that's what this film was. It was expectations of this young girl and her father, and then, you know, the suitor was, the actor's name is
Bruce Dern.
Bruce Dern.
A young, very young Bruce Dern.
Yes, and that was Lorna Dern's father. And he's credible actor. And I mean, all-star cast. You can't beat who all the characters are. But what was amazing about the movie is how they set it up with the tone and the lighting and the location, because that is a very famous, you know, Southern home. And I believe it's in Louisiana.
It is, yes.
Yeah. I've never been there, but I definitely want to go there someday. I've been to a lot of the plantations in Louisiana. That just happens to be not one of them that I have been to. So road trip, bucket list.
Baton Rouge.
Yes.
And I'm not going to pronounce it correctly. It's like Humus or Houmus House or something is the name of the plantation where they shot the exteriors.
Is it Houmous?
Yeah, something like that.
I think they pronounce it Homus. You know, Homus. You know, the Louisiana. It's like I hate to use this word, but it's like a bastardation of French. You know, I have this friend that I always wanted to call her last name Dubois. When she goes, nope, it's Dubos. Dubos. Bois. You know, is Dubos. And here I, you know, took all this French in high school. So I just go, Dubois, you know, she goes, no, Dubos. So you just never know. It's like Natchitoches, Louisiana, where they filmed Still Magnolias. They have their own way of saying all these names. And you can always tell somebody if they've been from Louisiana by the way they pronounce their parish or where they're from or whatever. But yeah, that home was just the iconic. And we all have these between Tara and Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte and all of Jezebel, all these films where they had these plantation homes, you know, and the Tennessee Williams. We just watched, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, and then we just watched the one with the William Faulkner short story collection film with Elizabeth Taylor and Paul Newman, where they had two, The Southern Home. And a lot of those were built on set, but that particular, the outside scenes is a real place, Louisiana.
Right.
So that was really created the atmosphere for the movie. And of course, you know, always having, when it would get to be night, it seems like everything's always in candlelight or the electricity's off. Why is that?
I don't know, but I love it.
Well, if you ever get to Louisiana, there is a wonderful bed and breakfast. I hope it's still open, called Tante Houppé. It's French for Aunt Houppé. And it has a dining room that you have your breakfast in, has no electricity. It's all by candlelight. And it has those New Orleans shutters. And you stay in the slave quarters, not the main house. The main house is the owner. I'm not sure who owns it now because the guy I knew who owned it passed away. But the slave quarters are 2 levels and just not far from the main house. But I have never in my life ever eaten in a home this has been years back, but in a home where they didn't have any electricity for the dining. It was lovely.
Oh, I'm sure.
The candelabra was lit with all the candles, and there were, you know, candles around the room. It really created a unique feeling. I could almost just hear the sweeping saga music coming through of some, you know, one of these iconic films. But Bette Davis, this was, you know, later on in her life when she came into this role, and every role she took, she threw her whole self into it. And I loved her in this film. I just had such sympathy for her, and her fiance, you know, was so sad. The story. Now, I don't want to give away any spoilers, because if you have not seen this film,
yeah, absolutely.
Wouldn't you agree, Robert, that these are the kind of suspenseful horror films that stick with you because it has a great story?
Sure, exactly. Great twists, you know, great plot twists.
And wonderful character development amongst the cousins, yes, and the father, and just different people in the community. And of course, everybody thinks the Bette Davis character has slipped beyond this world. And she was, I think it was very common for the time frame. Women were, you know, they got the vapors and they just weren't in their right mind. They had hysteria and stuff. And poor thing, her whole life, she was right and nobody believed her.
Right. You know what's so I guess in this particular film, when you're looking at the screenplay, the inciting incident of when things kick off is right at the very beginning, when the crew, when they show up to tear down the house. I guess it's the highway department who has right of way, and they're trying to run her off for property.
Oh yeah, and you know, and another thing we learned in the Writers Club today is always begin your novel with action. Mm-hmm. And talk about action, because nobody wants to see a historic, you know, plantation type home be torn down. I always cry every time I see a tree or a historic building. I wish we don't have that long of an American history. And you go to all these places in Europe where you go to buildings that have been there for, you know, centuries. I just wish we would take a little bit more care in the trust of our historic buildings. And so that's going on. Then we've got this cousin who comes in, and she's just impeccable. I mean, she's just very polished and then, you know, poor, you know, Charlotte is asunder and all this.
So, you know, what was going on behind the camera was as fascinating as what was going on in front of the camera.
Okay.
So this film was made on the cusp of whatever happened to Baby Jane. You know, so there was a huge success. So of course, Betty Davis had been nominated for an Academy Award,
Yeah.
and Joan Crawford had not. Well, Joan Crawford was so jealous that she lobbied against Betty Davis. That year, I think Anne Bancroft won for The Miracle Worker. Well, Betty Davis never forgave her for that. Well, so there was, right after that, because they'd had such success, let me think, I can't remember the writer's name. Last name was Farrell, I think. He wrote the novel for Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, but he'd also written a short story that had not been published called Whatever Happened to Cousin Charlotte, which became the seed for the film project, Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte. They cast Joan Crawford as the part of Miriam. They actually started to film with Joan Crawford. And Joan Crawford, there were a series of things, there's huge rivalry between Betty Davis and Joan Crawford on the set, to include like one evening, and Betty Davis was just sort of a rough and tumble kind of gal. So she would hang out with the grips and the camera folk, she would eat with them at lunch, and Joan Crawford wouldn't. So Joan Crawford, during shooting, went to go take a nap in her trailer. And so no one woke her. They all cleared out and they all went back to their hotel. And she wakes up in the dark out on this plantation. And she's livid. She's furious. Well, that was just one of several things. So Joan Crawford decides that, because of several things that happened, because the only way that Betty Davis would agree to do the part was if she got a producer credit.
Oh.
And pissed Joan Crawford off. So Betty Davis was like cutting Joan Crawford's lines. So Joan Crawford takes ill and takes to the bed and goes to the hospital for like 30 days and stops production. So finally, the insurance folks come and they say, you know what, fire her. So they fire Joan Crawford. They have to find an actress who will take over for Joan Crawford. They've already shot all of this footage. So they throw out some names. A couple of folks decline. Well, Betty Davis says, well, why don't we ask Olivia de Havilland, because she and Betty Davis were extremely close.
Well, she's lovely.
So the director had to travel all the way to the Swiss Alps to sit down with Olivia de Havilland. It took him 3 days to talk her into doing it. And the only reason she did it was because Betty Davis really wanted her to do it. So they had to come back, and because the timing was, because the clock was rolling and lots of money was being spent, they didn't even have time to outfit Olivia de Havilland in costumes. She had to wear her own clothes.
Well, that's why she looked fantastic.
She looked fabulous. Well, now, so there is one scene, 28 minutes, 30 seconds into Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte, where the moment where Miriam arrives, in the taxi.
Yes.
It's actually you actually could see Joan Crawford in the car. If you look closely, that's the only bit of footage they didn't redo. And you can tell because Joan Crawford she's wearing sunglasses and she's wearing a dark costume. And Olivia de Havilland is wearing light clothing.
Oh my goodness. Don't you hate it? Well, you kind of delight in it at first when you see things like that. I watched a movie the other night where there was a bullet had grazed a person's head, here. And then the next frame, it was on this side. And it could have been, they flipped but I caught it and I was caught up in the story. I wasn't looking for bloopers or anything, I thought. And then it went back to the other side. And I think those are things like they did a Downton Abbey where there was it wasn't Coke, but somebody left a can of soft drink up on the mantle in the background. And so when they filmed it, there's this Coke can in the back. I don't know what it was. It was some kind of soda. And they said, whoops. But it happens all the time. But 28 minutes and how long into it?
It's like 28. So it's like 28 minutes, 30 seconds in. And it's when you see
her get out of the
taxi. And it's a long shot. I think it is when Betty Davis is looking down.
She's coming up the long drive.
Yeah, and she's right down there, and Betty Davis is looking out over, and then you see the Miriam character looking up, and that's when it happens. That's when you actually see. So Joan Crawford was in the film for like a second.
Well, I can actually picture her playing this role.
Yeah,
because she's one of these people that carries herself so well. And then when she decides to go, it's just like scary as all get out. Joan Crawford is one of those women that she always had this glamorous look, but I thought, are guys really attracted to that? But evidently,
yeah,
she had quite a few. Didn't she have quite a few husbands? And
she did. She was quite popular. And I believe that she might have been bisexual. There are stories about her having had affairs with women as well.
Well, that's interesting. I can kind of see that too. I don't know. She was a very complicated woman. And, there's always been tons of stories about her. And it, back in that day when they had these publicists that put out the story they wanted people to know, I mean, they created parents, they created children that appeared from nowhere as adopted. And then you find out later that they were actually their own children. It's amazing to me the things that were nowadays. It's really hard to hide anything.
Right.
There is no privacy when you become a public figure of any sort, sports, political, celebrity, whatever, bass fisherman, whatever. You become targets for all kinds of paparazzi doing stories. But I did not know that. How did you learn this about Joan Crawford? Was this something that you did when you
read? There was, so in reading, but also it was actually touched upon in the Ryan Murphy series Feud that was about Joan Crawford and Bette Davis. So they actually do cover some of it, the filming of Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte.
Well, that's really fascinating. Do you know what the film was after that Bette Davis did after Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte? Because I'm trying to think, whatever happened to Baby Jane was kind of, everybody thought was the last of her. I didn't realize that Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte came on the tail end of that. I wonder if there were many more after that. Now, she was on Johnny Carson all the time and smoking, and one famous interview, it's on YouTube, where she's wearing all leopard. I just love Bette Davis because she said it like it was. She wasn't cruel or any way, and why anybody would have any rivalry with anything. I mean, just the fact that you both get in a movie is a pretty big deal. I would be, as accommodating as I could with the people around me, because I'd be as fan struck as probably anybody, even if I was a big star. So, but it's fascinating. Do you know anything about Joseph Cotten much? I just see him always as a stoic character.
So Joseph Cotten and Agnes Moorehead were actually part of the Orson Welles players. I forget what they call them exactly, but they were part of this group of actors who did the early radio broadcast with Orson Welles, and then they starred in several of his films. Agnes Moorehead and Joseph Cotten were both in a film that I love, and some people, it's a bit controversial, but it's called The Magnificent Ambersons, which was based on a novel called The Magnificence of the Ambersons, and I think it's a lovely movie.
I'm going to have to go back and watch that one. That sounds good. The Magnificent Ambersons. I'm going to tell you, I've probably seen it, because half the time I go back and see these movies and I go, oh, I've seen it. I just forgotten the name of it. Now, I very rarely ever forget an author and their book, but for some reason, movies, I guess it's because I've watched so many, the files are filled. I'm going to have to delete some files so I can keep room for all these new ones that I'm bringing out. But speaking of Southern Gothic, I was home the other night trying to find something to watch. It's getting harder and harder because there's not a whole lot of new things being made. I went on to Hulu and found a series called Southern Gothic. Have you heard of it?
No.
Well, it's an episode show about Southern Gothic crimes. So I go, oh, I've got to see this. What is it? The very first episode was set in Hawkins, Texas, where I live, where there was a triple murder in 1986 of two girls and a young man who were home from college, and it happened at Lake Hawkins, which is just down the road from me. And I'm watching this whole thing unfold and the mystery of it and who did it. And I'm looking, this is all the places I know exactly where they are, and you know, Holly Lake Ranch and all their lakes and everything and the trees. But it's true. They said, one of the, I think it was in this episode, they said, you know, in most of the rivers and lakes, if you ever drain them, it's going to be pretty amazing what you might find.
Oh, I'm sure.
So that just gave me the chills. I only watched the one episode and I go, that's enough for me. I'm going to have nightmares tonight about, but they said when people move to Hawkins, they always say, was that before or after the murders? And I've lived here for like 8 years coming up this fall, and I've never even heard of this murder. So I guess time does make things kind of slip and fade away. But things like Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte, isn't it amazing? There's been a zillion horror films done, a zillion, you know, but it's like Carolyn Haynes said today at the Writers Club. When you develop the characters, when you develop all four of those things for a story, the plot, the theme, the characters, and the setting, if it's very well developed, you don't ever forget the films. And I'd never really thought about that before. And she said, you always start a novel out with an action. And she told you just got to watch it, told a humorous story about how her very first novel, she was describing what that character was thinking. And then she sent it off to the editor and she said, thinking is not action. And she said, when she finally figured out how to do it, it all clicked. And I think that's why it's like riding a bike. You tip over, you tip over, you tip over, and then one day you got it. You're down the road, you're turning corners, you put on the brakes, you stop. We just have to do it till you get.
Absolutely. You know, what's key is trying to start it at the beginning of a novel or in a chapter as far into the action as you can, and it still makes sense. You know,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's always this foreboding horror of the unknown. I think the best horror films are the ones that make you use your imagination to, what I have in my mind is so much worse than the blood and gore they put in all these stupid movies. And I don't know, somehow when they do all that, it just, I'm done.
Yeah.
It's just like, I want to know the story. And that one was just right up to the very end. It had me frozen on the edge of my seat. You know, I have no idea what my younger sisters thought, but I remember that when that finally did come on television, I'd watch it every time it played because.
Well, I have it in my Vudu Video digital library.
Vudu Video Visual Library. What are some other ones that you have in there?
Oh my gosh. Well, there's so many. All of the Tennessee Williams plays that have been adapted for film, of course. Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, Streetcar. Yeah.
All of those. Yeah, they just fit in perfectly. You know, Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil is another one that to me is kind of like that. You don't want the person to be a murderer, but then because they're a likable fellow, and then, you know, you wonder. And it wasn't until I read the book before I watched the movie, and the movie wasn't exactly like the book, but those are the kinds that I really like. The atmospheric, where, you know, I was a big fan of Dark Shadows when I was in high school. And that was because you knew Barnabas was a vampire and he was going to get somebody, but you just never knew when, you know. I think those are the best. Can you think of any others like that stand out in your mind? I'm trying to think of other Well, The Birds, and we've watched that one. That one, that's not Southern Gothic, but it's still that anticipation. Any of the Alfred Hitchcocks are that way. The anticipation of not knowing, they watch the man murder his wife, and then, it's just horrifying. And then them trying to figure out what they're going to do about it. All of those kind of movies just really stick with me, and I can watch them over and over because each time you watch them, you pick up little different subtleties. But I will definitely, when I watch it, be thinking about Joan Crawford in that role.
So there's a novel, a Gothic novel by the late Shirley Jackson, We've Always Lived in the Castle. And they adapted that to film a couple of years ago, and that was really good.
I saw that, and she put didn't she write The Haunting of Hill House?
She did, yes.
Holy moly, that was great. I will add a couple of books that should be made into movies. Suzanne Burns wrote a book called A Crime in the Neighborhood, and it's told through the eyes of a little girl. And I've never been so scared in my life because, we all write our own story, and this little girl has in her mind that her next door neighbor is a killer. And you just got to read it. And the other one is Stephen Dobyns, Dobyns, wrote a book years ago. It came out from a publisher that went defunct, and I don't know if you can still get it, but it was called Church of the Dead Girls. And it's told through the eyes of the I think it's the junior high or high school science teacher, which is a very different perspective to be talking about what's going on in this town. And I think whoever narrates a story can make it even more interesting, whether it's a child or somebody from a nursing home or a science teacher, which that movie totally shocked me at the end. It may have been made into a movie, I'm not real sure, but the publisher was Turner. Remember Turner Publishing? It went under, and when you have a book published by a publisher, that you never know what happens to those books. But those two really, and there's another author who writes suspenseful contemporary stories like we're talking about, and her last name is Hitchcock. And I thought, oh my gosh, she must be no relation to Alfred Hitchcock. For the life of me, I can't remember her first name now. But read any of her books. You will be on the edge of your seat. And those are the kinds that I like to read, because then you don't go to sleep.
So I have to tell you a spooky thing that happened to me when I was on my writing retreat.
I want to hear, because I saw the cabin.
So I was in, I'm not quite sure how you pronounce it, Suchez, Georgia, which is just outside of Dahlonega in the North Georgia mountains.
I have no idea.
And so I was working on my second project, and I'm writing a sort of an eerie scene, and so sometimes I will record myself speaking it, just to listen to it out loud. So I recorded with my iPad, I actually put it at the computer so it could actually see this. You could see the words on the screen, and then I voiced it. So I read. It was probably about 1 minute and 24 seconds worth of a page.
Just dialogue, yeah.
Yeah. So I went back to play it. You hear me speak the first sentence, and then my voice stops, and you hear this really eerie sound in the video. I'll have to send it to you. I'll text it to you. But it's
really, got goosebumps. Oh my gosh. Was it late at night?
It was. So to set the scene, there are these little getaway cabins. They have outposts outside of big cities, and I went to the getaway post outside of Atlanta. So in this little cabin, they're like tiny homes. So there's a kitchen, a little bathroom, and there's this platform bed, and there's this huge, lovely picture window. So it was evening, and I was at the end of the day, and I had a decent day of writing, and I was going to record what I had written. So I lit candles because I love to light candles in the evening.
Me too.
And I put them all around the bed. And of course, there's my soundtrack for this specific novel is called Voyager, and it works by Max Richter. And there was so the opening chapter, I'm writing to a piece called November, and it's a little eerie. So I've got the candles, I've been writing to this.
You're setting the mood for the writing experience.
The mood. It's getting dark, and I play it back, and then, whoa. So they're actually, and I'll share this. So there was this part I had written. So there's a ghost that I'm writing about. On top of it all, let me find it. There's a part of, so I'm describing the ghost's voice. My voice is not a human one. It is falsetto, a chorus of cicada and cricket, part stutter of a laughing gull. So, and then so it recorded the whole time. You could see the movement of the flame. You could see you could see the words on the computer. And I'm thinking,
it's a video audio recording.
Video audio, and it just stops. I mean, my voice stops, but it continues to record, and you hear this otherworldly sound.
It actually sounds like it'd be a great opening as a book trailer.
Oh my God.
Chills.
It gives me chills when I think about it. But it's weird because you wonder, I felt good energy. I didn't feel necessarily scary energy, but I was unnerved, and I didn't sleep well.
I can imagine. I would hate to blow out the candles and turn, were there any other people around you in the cabin?
There were, you sort of in and out. I could see down the way a bit, a car in one of the little driveways. Should I need to run out and scream for help? But it was certainly one of the most unsettling experiences that I've ever had.
That is really, that's eerie.
Very eerie. So I will, when we finish up this,
you got to send it to me.
I'm going to text it to you.
I'm telling you, wouldn't that be great to say, hi, my name is Robert Weltney, and as I was writing this book, this very interesting thing happened, and say, and play it and then say, now if you want to know the rest of the story, you better read the book. I would be running to the bookstore to get that book. I can't wait to hear it.
So I think it, I don't know, it bodes well, certainly, to have that kind of connection. Yeah, I mean, it's a dark story, Gothic, of course, in an interesting place.
Mm-hmm.
But, Hush Hush, Sweet Charlotte, we were talking about Joseph Cotten,
yes.
And he was in quite a lot of movies. There was, oh my gosh, Stranger on a Train. I will tell you in just a second.
I've seen, I think, probably every film he's ever been in. He's one of those characters that he's so good. You remember him, but you don't.
Shadow of a Doubt is one of my favorite films that he's in, where he's an uncle who comes to visit his niece who has his namesake. Her Uncle Charlie, and he's wonderful in it. Wonderful.
Every time I watch these movies and I hear about these people, it makes me want to go read more about these actors and different people. And luckily, there's a lot of biographies out there. So, yeah, I will definitely check.
Oh my gosh! And we missed like one of the important ones. He gained worldwide fame in Citizen Kane.
That's right. That's right. And the last time I saw Citizen Kane I was in the hospital and I just had Lainey. So that's like 30 years ago.
And I know that you know this one, which is a bit of a psychological thriller as well. He was in Gaslight with Charles Boyer and Ingrid Bergman. And
was Charles Boyer the best at building up, that he had such a strange demeanor. He was interesting. And Gloria Gaynor. Oh, wow. I haven't seen that one in a long time. Just makes me want to go watch it too. So any other ones that he was in that I might recall?
Yes. Let's see. There was Love Letters, Duel in the Sun, Portrait of Jenny, The Third Man, Niagara. His final film in 1980 was Heaven's Gate. He was in a film called Heaven's Gate.
Heaven's Gate. I don't remember. Is that the one with Warren Beatty?
I think, yeah, I don't think, no, that was
Heaven.
Yeah, Heaven Can Wait. Can't Wait or something like that.
Yeah. Well, I have to check out the Joseph Cotton collection of films. But Olivia de Havilland, I don't even know how many films she had been in, and Bette Davis too. I like the Bette Davis films back when she was blonde. She was just a little trooper, man. She was a firecracker. And which reminds me, is next week we're watching the film Miss Firecracker.
Yes.
And I have not seen that film in a long, long time, but it's been on my mind for ever since we decided we were going to pick it. So we'll be watching it next week and discussing it. And it just ties in well with this July weekend. Did you have a good 4th of July?
I did. It was a nice 4th of July. Let's see. Went to a cookout with that a friend hosted. And that Monday I went to see the Van Gogh Experience.
I saw Bobby Cornblatt had gone, and my family, my daughters and I, we're going to go stay at the Adolphus and go do that while we are in Dallas. We're going to go to all the museums, but particularly the Van Gogh, and we're not even sure where it's going to be yet. So I'm sure it'll be probably down in the art district somewhere. But what did you think?
It was very moving. When we walked in, and immediately, you see his works, you see his replicas of his works of art, and then you see the sort of, the stories, and you actually get to see them in the size that they were produced, which is fascinating.
That is, because so many of them are not that big.
Right. Now, several of them were enormous, some of his works, but it was very, you're there with the music and you see the artwork, you see the quotes, things that he had been actually captured as having said, and I thought it was a very emotional experience. And then you walk through the initial exhibit where you're seeing the artwork and you're reading the story for yourself, and then you go into the huge room, where it's projected all around you, and it was just a lovely experience.
Well, while you were doing that, my daughter and grandson and I went to the Cherry Orchard, and that's here in Denton. And my daughter works at Rose Costume, and the original owner, next to her house, there is an empty lot amongst the trees, and nobody can build there because it's a floodplain. So they have done an art exhibition outside of chairs. And I'm going to be doing a blog when I get home on the Cherry Orchard. Evidently, they have a Facebook page. When I say the Cherry Orchard, it's CHAIRY. And it was pretty incredible because I've never seen so many chairs of different styles. And my grandson took his Pat the Bunny rabbit through with him and insisted upon sitting on most of the chairs. So we had a really good time. A little bit different from the Van Gogh experience, but my own, North Dallas art experience was fun. So I'm headed back home tomorrow so I can get back to a normal life. And I just cannot thank you enough for taking time, as always, out of your busy schedule, writing and all the good work that you're doing to join me on the Book and Film Club. But we have a really good time. Hopefully next week, there's so many people that love Miss Firecracker. We'll have a great time. I'm just trying, I know I have my baton, but I don't think we have any fire batons left around our house.
Probably a good idea.
But you never know. I may be twirling.
Well,
Anyway,
and maybe Ruthie Landis will join us. She can actually be Miss
she
Firecracker.
is Miss Firecracker because have you seen her new hairdo?
Yeah,
Oh my
great.
goodness, it's fabulous. I love it, and it suits her so very well. So who knows what will be. You just never know, folks, when you turn into the Book and Film Club, what Robert and I are going to be doing. So even though I'm not in my Southern Belle, this is just the way I dress. This is just, I had somebody say to me, oh, this is, you know, unusual. I like your earrings. And I said, an artist friend made these for me in Memphis. And I just pick up things, and I could not find a scarf to match this blouse. So this is actually a blouse that I tied into my hair. I am a Girl Scout, and I've learned how to improvise it with my wardrobe. So we will see you next Saturday night. I will get this converted and downloaded onto the Kathy L. Murphy channel. And please subscribe, click on the bell icon, and watch all the wonderful book and film clubs that Robert and I have been doing together. We have over 150 films up now, of book club meetings, of author interviews, of writing club. And be sure and watch. I just posted that Carolyn Haynes, who is a Harper Lee Award-winning author, wow, and who also won the Robert Wright Award in Mississippi. She is probably one of the most generous and lovely women out there, and she's hilarious. Her workshop today was everybody should listen to it that ever wants to write a book. So have a great night. I'm going to go join my family in here. We're my daughter and I are going to watch a podcast of the guy who wrote Crazy Rich Asians tonight, because that was one of our favorite books in film, personal books in film. And you know, our family's all about reading, all about books. So, and Robert's now part of my family. So thank you, everybody. We will see you next week at the movies. All right. Bye, Robert.
Safe travels, Kathy.
You too. Keep writing. We'll talk soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.